Images coming from the Ukraine are both unprecedented and heartbreaking. But as the U.S. and other countries punish Russia with sanctions, some of the impacts are being felt across the Atlantic here at home. Brock Turner reports.
John Carnahan is eagerly awaiting a string of dry days to get his crop in the ground. The cost of his inputs are more this year, in part because of inflation and broader economic factors, but also because of the war in Ukraine. Things like fuel, fertilizers, and herbicides are some of the costliest investments year to year in agriculture. A report last month from the United States Department of Agriculture estimates margins will be tighter this year. That's something Carnahan knows well.
Total farm income will be reduced over what it was last year, so the margin's just a lot tighter.
After a string of good years, this year appears different. One of the single largest line items for Carnahan and other farmers is nitrogen, which is critical for corn.
We purchased that back in the fall, so we actually increased our corn acres here on our farm. Some people thought that the price was too high for some of those inputs, so they may have chosen to switch to soybeans, which require less inputs.
That's not just anecdotal evidence. According to planting intention reports, Carnahan is an anomaly among Hoosier farmers.
It looks like Indiana, from the intentions that came out the 1st of March, we're going to plant about 300,000 less corn acres and 300,000 more soybean acres. And we're off to a pretty slow start.
From Silver's perspective, there's a clear explanation.
We're seeing historic fertilizer prices, N/P&K, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. Some of them at all-time highs, never seen them this high.
The war's impact on these areas might be obscure, but it takes significant amounts of fuel to produce those fertilizers. Bob White, the director of National Government Relations at the Indiana Farm Bureau, says tighter global supply, as much of Europe shuns Russian oil imports, paired with increased demand, has pushed the price of LP gas higher. That's having a significant impact on fertilizers farmers rely on.
Depending on where you're at in the Midwest, anhydrous ammonia prices have gone up 300 to 500%. So there's a huge increase in the nitrogen.
Carnahan and many other farmers pre-purchase most of their inputs before the growing season begins. That's allowed him to plant more corn this year, but White worries if the conflict drags on, problems could persist.
Looking out a year from now, or into late, let's say December, early next year, where's those fertilizer prices going to be? Are we going to have plenty of it?
But if the destruction from Russia continues, other countries could have problems securing grain and other commodities from Ukraine. Grain exports from there are expected to plummet this year.
We know a lot of the export infrastructure is receiving heavy damage along the ocean shipping ports. It takes time to rebuild that kind of infrastructure, so that will certainly be impacting Ukraine's ability to export going forward, even if this conflict were resolved today.
While experts say the U.S. does not depend on large quantities of grain from the Ukraine, other countries aren't as fortunate. But it is unlikely you'll see grain from Indiana on barges heading there.
We do export some corn to the global market, but Indiana's share of the global export market is pretty small. Same is true of soybeans. Indiana's soybean crop is used primarily here in Indiana.
Experts say because of that, the food supply here at home is likely secure, assuming there aren't significant weather events. That's a different story from what farmers are facing in Ukraine.
The farmers, they're wearing bulletproof vests and ballistic helmets as they're on their tractors trying to get their spring wheat crop and corn crop planted, dodging bullets, missiles, aerial attacks.
Reports say Russia has pillaged tractor dealerships, grain storage facilities, and has plans to destroy Ukrainian crops.
If you're worried about you don't have this choice or that choice, that's a lot different than are there bombs going off in the backyard or missiles landing. So that kind of puts it in perspective.
Everyone interviewed agrees higher prices and limited supplies are a small and worthwhile price to pay, a world away from the devastating loss of life occurring in the Ukraine. For Indiana News Desk, I'm Brock Turner.